journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead. And you guys, I'm so excited to have with us today Dr. Carolina Solis-Sanabria. Dr. Solis-Sanabria is a Harvard, Yale, Duke, and Inova Fairfax educated surgeon and Fulbright scholar. As if that weren't amazing enough, there's just so much more to her that you guys, I'm so excited to share with you. She actually currently works as a federal employee at a very prestigious health organization and volunteers in a clinic for uninsured patients. And she's also done global health work in Nicaragua. She's deeply involved in her faith and church community and volunteers on their medical team. She's overall just an incredible human. So Dr. Solis-Sanabria, thank you so much for coming today and spending a little bit of time with us, but please let the world know your story in your own words. I'm sure they're dying to hear more about it.
Thank you so much, Alani, for having me on your podcast. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm very happy to share my story. And please feel free to interrupt me and guide me as I share my story. So I guess, where do I even begin? I think I have a pretty unique story with some unique circumstances. And I guess I'll go ahead and begin at the beginnings. I was approximately 2 months old when my parents separated, and I was actually left by my biological father with my paternal grandparents. And at a very young age, I was adopted by my paternal grandparents. Mind you, I'm saying all of this with the knowledge that I have now, because when I was adopted by my grandparents in Nicaragua, which is where I spent the first 4 years of my life, I didn't have that knowledge of who my biological parents were. I was told by my paternal grandparents that they were my parents, and that I was actually told that my father was my brother, and that all of my aunts and uncles who were my grandparents' children, that they were my brothers and sisters. So I grew up with that knowledge at a very young age, and even grew up believing that. I guess I just started out with the whole story, but just going back to my time in Nicaragua, I remember those first 4 years. I remember I was very much cared for by my grandparents, who I called mom and dad. And I even had my great grandmother who was alive back at the time. And I remember being very loved by all of them. And then I had some more additional unique circumstances when I came to the US. So I actually came over with my grandmother. So I call her grandmother just to differentiate, but I grew up calling her mom, and she was always my mom. But so at the age of 4, she and I ended up crossing the border from Juarez, Mexico, to El Paso, Texas. I remember we crossed the border on a little canoe. I actually remember spending a night in jail. We were detained. And so these are some of the memories I have. And then we ended up taking the Greyhound bus over to Maryland. So I do remember that my biological father, who I grew up thinking was my dad, actually did accompany us to Maryland. And so in Maryland, I ended up enrolling in school when I was 4 years old. And then my grandmother ended up realizing that it would be better for us to stay in the US. I would have more opportunities there. And I started school. This was in Prince George's County, Maryland, at a elementary school called Langley Park McCormick Elementary School. And I remember just enjoying school. I learned English at a very young age. And obviously I came here when I was very young, so it wasn't very difficult to learn. At age 9, then we ended up moving to a different part of Maryland, to Montgomery County, Maryland, Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is where I currently live. I ended up coming back here. And I continued to go through my schooling up until the age of 12. I had another big event, which involved immigration, ICE coming to our house. At that moment in time, I forgot to mention that when I came to the US, there were actually two of my uncles. I'm going to call them uncle brothers because it's confusing. And even for me sharing this story, that's been one of the pieces I've had to detangle from my story. There were two uncle brothers, so biologically my uncles, but I grew up thinking they were my brothers. And so immigration came to our house in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and they actually took both of my uncles and detained them. One of them was actually deported back to Nicaragua, and the other one stayed in a detention center in a different part of Maryland for a couple of months. And so I remember during that time, it was my grandmother and I. We thought we were also going to be deported. And I remember we started selling all of our stuff. She started sending some stuff back to Nicaragua. At one point, we were sleeping on a mattress because we had gotten rid of all of our stuff, her thinking that we were going to have to leave the country. And in the meantime, I was actually doing really well in school. I don't even know how, but somehow I was getting good grades. I really enjoyed school. School is always like a safe place for me. I remember my grandmother always used to encourage me to study. She only got an eighth grade education. This was a different time. She was in Nicaragua, and she said that one day she told her mom, I don't want to go to school anymore. I don't feel well. And her mom just said, that's fine. You don't have to go to school anymore. And so for her, school was really important as a way for me to get ahead and make something out of my life. So she always pushed me to do that. She had many kids, including myself. She ended up having 10 children. Three of them died in two of them in one of them died as an infant, and the other two, she had twins that were stillborn. But she really encouraged me to study. And so I was a good student. And when we were facing that period of time where immigration came to our house and we faced deportation. I remember we had a school teacher. There was a school teacher who was very involved in the immigrant Latino community, and she was a really big blessing in our life. She actually helped me to get letters of recommendation from the school and everything, and was really supportive through the whole legal process that I was facing because I had to go to court, present myself before a judge to see if I could stay in the country. And I remember this school teacher, she was very helpful. And I'm actually still friends with her. She lives in a retirement community. I go to visit her there. And so I ended up going before a lawyer. And thankfully, because of everything that they presented, the school presented, he allowed me to stay. I think he said, I don't remember all the details now because it was a long time ago. I was like 12 or 13. I remember he said I could stay for an extra year or something like that. Oh, I was trying to remember that year that I was able to stay in the US. There was a law that came out. I think it was called La Ley Nacara, like it was for Nicaraguans and other immigrants that allowed a path to become a permanent citizen. And so I was finally able to become I'm not sorry, I didn't mean to say permanent citizen, permanent resident. And so I was able to become a permanent resident. I think it was around age 15 or 16. And I was really fortunate that happened at that point in time because it meant that I was going to be able to go to college. Otherwise, it would have been really difficult financially. And so I applied to school, ended up getting accepted at Yale. And thankfully, I was able to get a free ride there because it was all need-based financial aid. But if it hadn't been for this pathway to become a permanent resident, it would have been much more difficult to me. So I'm really grateful for that. So then I go off to college, and I always knew I was going to be pre-med. So I go ahead and take my pre-med courses. Then I go off to medical school and then eventually do all my medical training. And that was a long process going through that. There were definitely challenges involved. And I'm so grateful to have had those opportunities. And I'm a person of faith. I really believe God really orchestrated all of that But I guess going back to the imposter syndrome, I ended up finding out eventually, like when I was older, that my dad was my brother, or no, that, see, it's even confusing for me now. Sometimes I think my life is a whole telenovela story. But I ended up finding out that my dad was who I thought was one of my brothers. And this isn't one of the I grew up with two uncles, so it wasn't one of them. But I remember when I first found out about it, even when somebody told me that this was the case, my grandmother was still hesitant to admit it. And I feel like I had always suspected it growing up because I was raised by my grandmother, and she obviously was older. It was always a suspicion of mine, but it was what I was told. So I was like, I'm just going to accept it. These are the people that I trust. This is my family. And so when I found out about it, I was like, just tell me the truth. I won't be upset. I won't be angry at you. I told my grandmother. And so she finally accepted it. And I just remember after I found out, I just continued. Nothing had changed and everything stayed the same in my family. My uncles still continued to call me their sister. Nobody really knew on the outside. And I didn't really realize how much this affected me because in retrospect, I realized that I always felt like an imposter. And talk about like imposter syndrome. I felt like my whole identity was fake. And it's something that I've really had to grapple with throughout my life because there was a certain part of me that was like, look at everything you've had. You came to the US, you've had these challenges, but at the end of the day, you've also been incredibly successful. You've been to all these elite schools and everything. So I was always like, why should I even complain about everything? And for the longest time, I just suppressed all of this, but I didn't realize it was actually bothering me on the inside. And eventually I started speaking about it more within my family. I confronted my father eventually. And at age 25, I finally went and met my biological mother. So I started to put the pieces together. I have siblings on each of my parents' side, started meeting them, interacting with them. And all of this was in the middle of my medical training, where I was facing another set of imposter syndrome, being a woman trying to become a surgeon, a Latina, also trying to become a surgeon and not really seeing a lot of female, Latino surgeon role models. So I also felt like an imposter there. And these two things were going in tandem. And so I was just going about my life, trying to do the best I could, focus on my career. All these family things were going on as well. And I think where I really started to undergo breakthroughs was when I started seeking help. I remember I was in medical school. At one point, I was like, you know what? I'm so confused about my family situation. I don't even know what to call my brothers. Are they my brothers? Are they my uncles? And I remember going to the student health center. I was like, I feel like I just need to talk to someone about this. And the response that I got was like, you can call them whatever you want. And so that was like the extent of the help that I received. And eventually I sought out additional like counseling for all these kind of confusing family situations I was going through. And that was probably in my early 30s. So it took me a while. Finally sought out a counselor and I was like, I'm dealing with this family stuff. And I will say this about my parents, even though I was able to connect with them again, it's never been a super close relationship. And that's something that I've struggled with. And I can go into that detail a little bit later. And Alani, please feel free to interrupt me if you want
You
to
are
ask
good.
that,
No, you're doing
because I
awesome.
feel like I'm going all over the place. But feel free to redirect me or orient me.
Yeah,
But
no, you're good.
so I sought out help from this counselor, and I remember processing with her some of the feelings, and I had all this happen to me, and I don't even know how to go about processing it. And ultimately we talked about it for a session or two, and after that her response was like, but that's all in the past, you need to think about the future. And I continued with her for some time. Long story short, it ended up not being a good fit with that counselor, so I stopped working with her. And then in the midst of all this, I was finishing my training, and so I finally finished my training in surgery at the age of 33. And at that point, that was around the time, I think maybe a year later, that I met you, Alani, because after finishing my training, when it was a challenging training to be a surgeon, long work hours, the imposter syndrome. And after all of that, I considered getting additional training, doing a subspecialty in surgery. But knowing myself, I'm the type of person that learns by doing. And so I felt I've been through this training. I got an MPH in the middle of it too. I did a Fulbright in the middle of it. And so I thought to myself, I just need to go out there and practice as a surgeon and and then figure out if I want to subspecialize or the specific direction later on. So I ended up finishing my training, and then after just moving around so much through training, going to Connecticut, Boston, North Carolina, a year in Nicaragua, at that point I was like, I just want to go home and I just want to feel some sense of grounding. And so I decided I wanted to settle back home in the DC area. And I was already at Inova Fairfax, so I was already close to home. And so I interviewed at different surgery jobs. One of them was in Maine, a different location, another one was in Connecticut. But long story short, I ended up deciding I wanted to find something here in the DC area locally. And one of my options to give me flexibility was to do this thing called locums surgery. And it basically means that you're a traveling surgeon. And so my very first experience as a surgeon was in Oklahoma. And so I ended up having that be my first surgery job. It was a wonderful experience. I really loved working with that population. And then after that, I did a short stint in Montana. I was also in Appalachia, I was in North Carolina. It gave me a little bit of a sense of what it was like to practice in some more rural areas, which has actually been something that's been beneficial in my current position because I think it's given me some perspective for some of the needs experienced in some rural areas. But that being said, I found a position here in the area, and that's around the time I met you, Alani. I mentioned that because when I first met you, I think I was in Montana. And it's funny, now you're in Montana.
Yes, I am.
So, so that's funny. And I remember being in a hotel, I think when I first talked to you, we were connected by a friend of mine. And at that point, I just remember thinking, I just so want to be home. I want to be settled in in my community and just feel grounded. And when I was looking for a therapist at that point as well, because I had just stopped working with my previous therapist or counselor, just dealing with these family of origin issues. But I started working with you, and I remember things really started to change because I think you were one of the first people that really encouraged me to just be my authentic self, really encouraged me to challenge a lot of my limiting beliefs, which I had a ton of, and I'm still working through a lot of them, but I didn't realize how much of an impact my whole family of origin story had played on me. I had just kept it under wraps. Even just sharing it with other people, it took me a while to finally admit it to friends. I did, and I have. It's not like this is something that's new and I'm just starting to share, but I know there was so much shame surrounding it because my story was kept a secret. And so I really appreciated you encouraging me to be honest about myself and everything that I was feeling. So that's something that I've been grappling with over the years. Another thing that I want to share, which I think is really significant to my story and just my healing journey, is that I've been a little bit of a late bloomer. I was raised by my grandmother, and also I was in school forever. You can tell I finished at 33. I didn't start dating until much later in my life. And actually, my first boyfriend was at age 32, 33. And this particular relationship was really significant to me because it didn't work out, but it did really propel me in a lot of my healing journey. It was the relationship that made me realize that I had a lot of attachment issues. Even though I was raised by my grandmother and I had her support, I realized that not having been raised by my biological parents, being disconnected from them and losing them really played a big role in my life. And so with this particular relationship, I realized I had a lot of kind of attachment issues, a lot of anxiety. I even took one of those attachment tests and I think it said I had an anxious avoidant attachment. But long story short, this particular relationship, we dated for I think a year and a half, and eventually we broke up, but we ended up staying on as friends for the longest time because it was hard for either of us to let go. And one of my goals has always been to get married, have a family. But I realized that in continuing to be in this relationship or friendship, it was more of a friendship afterwards. It was going to be really difficult for me to able to meet other people and move on. And I say all that because I think this particular relationship really propelled me to seek additional healing. I ended up eventually finding a therapist to work on some of my attachment issues and really look at healing some of those wounds from childhood, from being disconnected from my mother and my father. And though that relationship didn't work out, I am grateful for everything that I was able to learn from it. And I'm grateful for the person as well because he was a friend to me. And I did go through some difficult situations where my grandmother and my grandfather passed away. That's another thing. In 2020, my grandmother passed away from COVID, which was really difficult. And this person was there for me. So I want to acknowledge that even though it didn't work for this person, I'm grateful for the friendship that we had. And sometimes people come into your life, and even though they may not stay or be the person that you're meant to be with, I feel sometimes there's lessons to be learned, and you can still feel gratitude for the place that they held in your life. So I do want to say that. But I did go through a difficult situation where my grandparents both passed away within 5 months of each other. And that was really tough. I had to really process that as well. It took me several years. I speak about it right now, 4 years later, but it's grief is tough. It certainly brought up a lot of the issues that were lurking inside of me. The loss of my parents brought that up again. Part of me had the hope that now that my grandparents were gone, maybe my parents would be closer to me. And that didn't quite happen. It was somewhat of a disappointment. And then in the midst of all of this, I was in therapy, working with you, trying to heal myself. And I had also was going through the loss and letting go of this relationship. So it just felt like I was losing everything. And that was really tough. It forced me to seek out community. And obviously, through my faith is really important to me. And I ended up finding a support group at church as well and leaning into close friendship as well. And I've been trying to learn, okay, how do you navigate this situation, being single, being disconnected with your parents, odd family dynamics, and this career too, which requires a lot, and where I do feel that I am walking in my purpose in this career. It's been a lot of trying to figure that out. And so that's where I am now. And I guess I'll pause in case you have any questions or
Oh my
comments.
gosh,
I feel like I just
there it is, guys.
everything.
There it is. No, thank you so much for sharing. There is so much to your story. I feel like you've lived three lifetimes and you're still so young. And I was just taking notes on the things that were jumping out at me as you were talking. And yeah, so the cat's out of the bag. Carolina is one of my clients, and we've been working together for a while. And First, for the audience, I want you guys to know you heard her story and her words, but she's so incredible and powerful in terms of the courage that she has to face all of her fears. And there were a bunch of other things that jumped out while you were sharing your story at me, which is whether you realize it or not, I don't know that maybe we've ever really talked about this, but your intuition has been very strong since you were a very young kid. So
Mhm.
when you were talking about, I always suspected something was off with my grandmother in terms of I was told she was my mom, but something inside me said, I don't really know. But I believed and trusted this information because this came from my core
Mhm.
family who I should trust and love. And then following up with, in college when you were struggling with all these imposter thoughts coming out, you intuitively knew I need to go get help. And that journey of seeking help, it takes multiple times to find the right fit sometimes, whether it's a therapist or a coach. And you guys know, like, when it comes to my coaching clients, I always tell them if by the end of our first call, it's not a heck yes, I want to work with you yesterday, then you should go find someone else. I will help make referrals. Same thing should apply for a therapist. And so it sounds like you went on your own journey of you tried to reach out, you tried to connect. When it didn't work the first time with that university counselor, you didn't give up. That intuition
Mhm.
said, kept going, find
Yeah.
the right fit for you. And the same thing came up with your intuition in terms of you could have continued your education and you're very good at it, clearly, but you knew yourself is what you said, and you learned better by doing is the thing you knew about yourself. And so you knew intuitively that I needed to just go do. And so
Mhm.
I want to highlight this because I'm willing to bet me reflecting this back to you, you would not have known that about yourself at that age or in those times, but it's so clear to me, and I hope it's really clear to the
Mhm.
audience that intuition was there guiding you the
Yeah.
entire time.
It's
Same
funny
thing.
that you said that because I just bought a car and my car salesman told me that he thought that I was an intuitive person. So maybe God's trying to send me a message.
It's like just coming out of your pores. Like people recognize this about you. I love that. And so that intuition was always strong with you, even in the midst of this imposter syndrome. And so you were being guided, you were listening, but it felt very chaotic in those early years for you in terms of figuring out your identity of who am I,
Yeah.
especially when you found out that who you thought you were wasn't actually who you were. And then
Mhm.
you said you suppressed it. Everything went on as normal. It was like your whole world changed, but there was no external adjustment with anybody around you, like business as usual. And to me, I'm sure to the listener as well, but to me, I'm just like, how can people around you just keep behaving like
Mhm.
normal? But those are the patterns that we fall
Yeah.
into when it comes to the identity that we're given. Okay. And so the first thing I want to point out in terms of when you and I first started working together is, and this is from your original notes,
Mhm.
but you were lacking direction, you felt
Mhm.
really stuck, you were doing the locums, right? So you were a traveling surgeon and there were no jobs opening up. You were curious about going into a subspecialty. Maybe you weren't quite fully decided on that. But we
Mhm.
talked about what your ideal situation
Yeah.
was. And what you actually said was, I want to be a surgeon. I want to be academically connected to others. I want community. And I
Mhm.
want to have a thriving life at work, at church, and at home. And the first place where we actually started was in understanding what your values were. Going along with your story, you were given a story, you were given a set of values. And so often we just continue into adulthood with those values that were given to us. And the first thing we had to do was identify what was your value system personally. And so that's really important because obviously all values are very important, but we can't be 100% of every single value all the time. And one of the key values that has always been a theme for you has been community.
Yep.
And I remember, so you were in Oklahoma at the, or maybe Montana at the
In
time,
Montana.
in
Yeah.
Montana. and you were like, I want community and I feel victim almost. Those were not your words, but
Yeah.
you were like, I feel powerless to create my own circumstances. And you worked really hard envisioning what your ideal life looked like. We did your values assessment, which is free on my
Mhm.
website. We'll include that link in the show notes to identify who you were on the
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, you fought and worked really hard on those internal beliefs, which
Mhm.
impacted your behaviors to create
Yeah.
that life of community that you really wanted. And
Yeah.
would you mind sharing with people a
Yeah.
little bit about what does community feel like and
Yeah.
look like for you now?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the things that I did want to share. That right now I do feel like I'm in community, connected to my purpose. The work that I'm doing right now is very much aligned with my values and involves working with underserved populations. I'm actually working in the place where I grew up. So I know the population here. I'm connected at my church. And so I feel like all the things that I was longing for and that I knew were in alignment with my values, I'm actually living right now. And it feels really good to be back home, to feel grounded. Another value for me is progress. I'm still working on my healing journey. My connection to God is really important as well because I realize I can't do all of this on my own. I have to rely on Him and pray that He would continue to guide my path because there's certain things that we do have control over and we can work on those things, but there's so many things that we don't. And so it's all about navigating and having wisdom to navigate our circumstances. What can I do? What do I just have to accept? And so it's a journey. And I'm so grateful for where I am now, looking back at that hotel in Montana, because they used to put us up in hotels while we were doing our medical work and just to be here in my own home, to be serving my community. I mainly work with an uninsured population. Many of them are undocumented, as I was for a long time. So I feel so grateful to be able to be here and to be walking in alignment with my values.
Oh,
So
I
I
love that
see,
so much.
yeah, and I even see how a lot of the challenges that I've had have served me, or not, I shouldn't say have served me, but have been turned around for good. Even those experiences in rural areas, they've impacted or given me perspective for the work that I do now as well.
Yes. Yes. But at the time that you were going through those
It felt,
trials, it felt
no,
like what?
it felt awful. It felt like
Yeah.
I feel so far away. I don't know what my direction is. And I'm learning now that even when uncomfortable situations come, it's not always the end of things, or sometimes there is a purpose in all of it, you know?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So community, spirituality,
Mhm.
achievement is another one of your big values. And that's
Uh,
clearly, oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say it has been one of my big
Right.
values, but I think I define it differently. I think one of the questions that you sent me was about success,
Mhm.
how that my definition of success has changed. I think for a long time it was clearly I've been a nerd. I'm studying on paper. It is a big value, but I realize that it's not just about success or getting the best grades or just trying to do the best you can. I think my bigger values are, like you said, community, purpose, alignment. So I define it a little bit differently because I have had to deal with perfectionistic tendencies growing up. A lot of it, I think, was from my grandmother because she was always like, work so hard, do this, do that. And it came from a good place, but it also came from a place of you have like fear, like if you don't measure up then you're not going to be accepted, and so I've had to shed a lot of that as well, and I want to be doing things out of love, out of joy, out of connection, as opposed to if I don't measure up then I'm not going to be accepted.
Yes.
That's kind of how
There's
my achievement has changed.
Yes, there's so much good stuff there to unpack. And I want to make sure that the audience really understands what she just said. So, first, it was clearly achievement was on her original values statement.
Mhm.
Clearly, she has achieved a lot on paper. What I'm hearing between the lines is you saying, yes, even though on paper I look good, there were
Mhm.
seasons in my life while I was working through all that where I didn't feel
Mhm.
powerful or
Yeah.
like what the paper suggested
Mhm.
because of your imposter syndrome. And how over time, because of this work that you've done to shift your mindset, first she mentioned a tool that is very easy for anybody to use that I love using in the beginning with my clients, which is, are your thoughts fear-based or are they joy or love based? So if you're doing things from a place of fear, so in this case, it was Carolina's grandmother, mother, right? Who pushed her to achieve. That's where she got that achievement value. And although she can see clearly it was well intended because her grandmother knew that the path to success and thriving had education in there. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, the flip side of that, it was a double edged sword. And it got you to a place of if I'm not achieving, that I'm not
Mhm.
valuable or I'm not
Yeah.
worthy or I don't belong. So your ability to see yourself identity wise as someone who is worthy hinged on that achievement. But now, because you've undone all that old operating system, now what you're saying is actually it's more self actualizing, right? So I think what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, is I have one life to live. And
Mhm.
when I leave this earth, I want to know that I left it all out on the field.
Mhm.
And so every day I'm going to work, not to achieve for achievement's sake, but I'm going to work to be the best version of myself
Yeah.
every day, to be of service. And that requires me loving myself and doing this
Mhm.
work to heal myself. Because
Yeah.
when I heal myself, I'm a better surgeon, I'm a better friend, I'm a better sister, daughter, whatever it might be, which I love. Guys, we just shared that in a 3 minute period, but we're talking about decades of work. And even she and I, we've been together working on and
5
off.
years.
Yeah, for 8, 9, 10, actually
28,
longer,
yeah, almost 6 years.
longer.
Oh my
Yeah, yeah,
goodness.
I know. Isn't that
Has it
crazy?
been that long or was it? Yeah. Oh
Yes,
my goodness. That's
yes,
crazy.
I know. But it's so amazing seeing where you have landed and how you continue to grow. And so,
Some of
so
us
what,
take the long path, guys, so don't feel like
yes.
it
Well,
needs to be an easy fix because some of these things require time. And as long as we're
yes.
making progress, I focus more on like progress as opposed to perfection. That's my new value system.
I love that. So instead of I have to be perfect all the
Yeah,
time, excellence is actually one of your top values
yeah,
as well.
yeah. It's more excellence. Yeah.
More excellence. But the difference between perfection and excellence is perfection demands zero error, whereas excellence says, this is what we're shooting for. If we
Mhm.
don't hit the mark, that's okay. We show grace, we learn. So we're either winning or we're growing. There's no winning and losing when
Yeah.
you're talking about excellence. And the other thing that you brought up that I want to highlight to the audience as well is healing is very cyclical.
Hmm.
And as you're going through different experiences, you might have the same wounds opening back up in your,
Yeah.
man, I thought I healed this. Like, why are
Yeah.
we back here? It's just another opportunity to grow deeper roots and identity and understanding yourself. And it's not something you are allowed to be frustrated. It can be
Yeah.
annoying because you're like, I want to move on to something else. But you talking about when your parents left and realizing that abandonment that happened,
Hmm.
and then going through that again when your grandmother and grandfather died,
Yeah.
is even though they didn't like abandon you, it felt
With
that
another,
way.
it triggered all those feelings.
And all of that is just opportunity to dig into, okay, what else do I need to
Yeah.
heal because of this? So rather than just staying in victim mode, it's I
Mhm.
can grieve, I can be
Yeah.
sad. And I know that this is all working together because I have hindsight. Like now you have the benefit of
Mhm.
hindsight
Yeah.
in terms of knowing that what sucked back then actually was good for me. Now I
Mhm.
can deal with discomfort, and you embody all of your values every day. And it's funny when I think about that first session we had in 2018 and you're in Montana, and the hope I wanted to encourage you with was there is a way out and you're going to get out of this. And you did. You've created this really incredible career, and not for the sake of having a powerful career, but you're doing work that you really love. And I hope it's okay for me to share this, but
Mhm.
some of my favorite times in session with you have been when you talk about being bedside as a surgeon and
Mhm.
you share like the holistic level of healing that you bring to your patients. It's not just I'm here to operate on you and I'm
Mhm.
leaving. It's also nourishing the
Yeah.
soul and the
Yeah.
whole person.
Absolutely.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your
Yeah.
journey getting to that space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things that I consider in my career because I really do see it as a vocation and just a place as a surgeon. I consider it such a privilege to have patients be able to put their trust in me to basically cut them open. It's crazy, but that level of trust I never want to take for granted. The fact that someone's coming to me and putting their health in my hand. So I always want to reciprocate that and just listen to their concerns because I think so much of healing isn't just, okay, a transaction. Okay, let me take out your gallbladder. Let me take out your appendix. It's how you make someone feel. Do you make them feel like cared for, listened to, and also what else is going on in their life? What else is impacting their health? I can give some examples, and this may be a very simple example. Someone coming in for a hernia repair, and there's certain things that may impact whether there's complications. For example, one of them may be weight. And so if someone comes to me and they say, I'm struggling to lose weight, and because of this, perhaps I may have to wait to get my hernia repaired. And sometimes I may want to explore, okay, why is it difficult to lose weight? And so sometimes patients share that they're having issues at home or they're experiencing certain stressors. And so I need to take all of that into account and see the whole person, not just see someone as, okay, this is just another surgery that I need to do. I need to understand where they're coming from and what may be some of the challenges that they may be facing so that I can better deliver care for them and perhaps even connect them to some other resources to optimize their health.
Oh
So,
my goodness, guys, this is amazing. So, transformational work rather than transactional work.
mhm.
And that
Yeah,
is from a pure place of love. And I've always loved the minutes that you share those stories because it just
yeah,
shows who you are as a person and also the connection. So,
yeah,
connection is one of your top five values as well. And your ability to connect with the client is very important to you in terms of creating that win for yourself, right? Like
yeah,
it's not just about you. Yes, you're a surgeon. Yes, you heal. Yes, you give and you transform other people's lives. But for you, the joy also comes in connecting with that individual and
yeah.
letting them know that you are seen as a
Hmm.
human being and I
Yeah.
care about you.
Hmm.
And that is, we need more of that. We need more
Yeah.
connection. We need more of that love. And out of curiosity, what drove you to medicine to begin with?
I've always been fascinated by the human body. I've always loved anatomy. I've always loved learning how things work. And so I felt, and I always knew I was going to be a doctor. And when I made it to medical school, I was like, let me keep my mind open. But at the end of the day, I ended up going with surgery because I love being able to see the immediate impact that you can have on patients, even if it was a small procedure like a laceration repair, or this was when I was a medical student, or draining an abscess. It was just an immediate effect. And just being able to make that impact was very meaningful. And I honestly feel like it's a calling for me. It's what I was meant to do. And I don't say that about a lot of things. I tend to overthink things, but like when it comes to medicine, it was probably like one of the easiest choices I had to make in my life in terms of deciding. Now, has it been easy, the journey? Oh, no, it hasn't. But I definitely have felt that calling and I feel like it was what God intended me to do. And the funny thing is both of my parents are actually my biological parents are actually physicians, but I didn't know that they were my parents growing up. So the fact that I ended up choosing this was interesting because it was like one of the things that I always knew. As I said, I was from age 2 months onwards, I didn't grow up with them.
Wow. There's that intuition again, though,
Yeah.
right? You're like, oh, I always knew I was going to be a doctor.
Like I
Okay.
said, I don't know that about a lot of things.
But you knew that about
This, yeah. And then I actually
yes.
had an interesting situation. I think when I was 15, I was taking the bus to go somewhere, and I actually had someone come and tell me, a stranger said to me, I think you're going to be a doctor. And he ended up being a person of faith, but it was just like something that was out of nowhere. And I just felt like it was further confirmation from God that it was my life path. I know that may sound strange to a lot of people, but even just the way God has orchestrated a lot of like my challenges, it's just felt something that I was called to do.
Yes. Okay. And you're very kind in saying maybe like might sound strange to other people. We love talking about that stuff on this podcast
Mhm.
because, like you said at the beginning, there's so much that is within your control, but there's so much more that really isn't.
Mhm.
And it's all about how you interact with that metaphysical element. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounded like you'd said was when this person shared this word
Mhm.
with you, it felt peaceful because you said it helped confirm
And
that
I
that was
always
your path.
knew it wasn't something that I always knew. Like I was taking classes at a local college because I was this little overachieving little student. And so I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, and that was what I was preparing myself for. So it's
Yes.
more like confirmation.
Oh my goodness. That
Right.
is, I always get goosebumps when I hear stuff like
Yeah.
that. That's so amazing. And so I want to switch gears for a second and talk about a very specific part of your story. And it
Hmm.
has to do with a dog.
Oh, the dog. Yeah. She's around here. I'm surprised she hasn't hopped on my lap yet.
Yeah, she's mom's busy.
Chiquita, get over here.
Oh my
We've got
goodness.
it. She's always on all the Zoom calls, so
Yes, we have to say hi.
gotta incorporate her.
Hello, Mama. Oh my gosh, you are so beautiful.
She's
Yes. Oh,
tired because
so
we went to the
photogenic.
beach yesterday. So
That is so wonderful. Okay, guys, so there's this whole story with this dog, and I'm going to start with what I recall about the journey to being a pet mom. But so we're working together, and you're in the space of, I think I want to get a dog, but I don't feel, I can't remember if it was like, I don't have time for a dog, like they cost money. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that journey to getting this
yeah.
beautiful bundle of joy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've wanted a dog my entire life. I had one when I was in Nicaragua, but obviously I came to the US when I was 4. So I always asked for a dog. Growing up, we lived in apartments, and so it really wasn't possible. And then like I go off to my studies, I can't have one in a dorm. Then I'm working 80 hours during training, so I can't really have one. And then I think when I ended up strongly considering getting a dog, I was getting ready to buy a house. And I was still working a busy job as a general surgeon, crazy hours. And so I was like, I don't know if I can do this. It's a lot taking care of this dog. Like, it's a big responsibility. And I think we talked about it in our sessions, and I was just hesitant, even though I really wanted it. And then somehow I decided to get one, and she's been the best investment that I've made. So
Yes.
providing me a lot of joy, a lot of lessons from her, learning how to live in the moment with her. And she's a character.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We love her. She's amazing. And so I love this story because it's such a simple and easy illustration of fear versus joy-based decision
Mhm.
making. And even though there's that intuition again saying, I always wanted a dog. I always wanted a dog. This was part of my
Yeah,
life. And of course, there were times where practically speaking, it didn't make sense. So you're in the
yeah,
dorms or whatever. But when the time came where that opportunity opened up, you almost didn't take it because your
yeah,
brain was rationalizing all
yeah,
the reasons why it wouldn't work out. And so, out
yeah.
of curiosity, if you had never gotten her, what would
Hmm.
you have robbed yourself of?
This face, look at
Look
that.
at the, oh my gosh, she's so cute,
Yeah,
you guys.
yeah. I think I would have robbed myself just like of all the moments with her, just having fun, all the joy that she brings to other people. I went to the beach yesterday, and I made so many friends because everyone came up and said hi to her.
Yes. And so that was just a small example of the mindset work that needed to
Mhm.
happen in order for you to seize and embrace your joy, right? That joy was always there,
Yeah.
and it was your opportunity to receive it or not receive it. And you finally got to a place where you said, no, I am worthy of receiving this
Mhm.
beautiful face and I'm going to. And so that is one of the bigger things when it comes to imposter syndrome is our worthiness
Yeah.
of I'm not worthy to have a joyful, fun life. It's not
Yeah.
like when you're in imposter syndrome, you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
And so, out of curiosity for you, because I know we only have a short period of time to talk about your entire life story,
Yeah.
basically. And clearly, the audience knows that you've come out the other side and you have this incredibly powerful career and story. There are always going to be parts of our story that maybe aren't fully resolved or
Yeah.
not 100% healed in terms of going
Mhm.
back to how they were. Would you mind sharing maybe an element of that, what that looks like, and what your healing journey looks like now?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, especially the question about worthiness, because it is something that I've had to struggle a lot with. I think being abandoned by my parents, I think really has made me question, even though it wasn't their intention to make me feel this way. Even my dad has said, I didn't abandon you, I left you in good hands. And so, even though they didn't think that they were abandoning me, the experience itself, their absence created this sense of abandonment and at the same time this sense of unworthiness. What was so wrong about me that not even my parents wanted to keep me? And that's something that I've had to struggle with for a long time. If I'm not worthy of being kept by my parents, what does that mean about me and how I interact in the world? Does that mean I'm not worthy of having fun? Does that mean I'm not worthy of rest? Does that mean I have to like continuously work crazy hours in order to prove myself, in order to prove my worthiness? So I think that's how it manifested in me. And it's been lots and lots of years of unlearning that my value doesn't come from whether or not my parents decided to keep me, but it comes from my intrinsic worth. And as I said, I'm a person of faith, so I derive my value from just the fact that I exist, that I'm made in the image of God. And it's something that I have to continuously remind myself of, that my value doesn't come from anything that I do, anything that I achieve, but just because I am a person who inherently has value. And because of that, my value can't be stripped away from me because of something that I do or don't do. And that's still part of my healing journey. Even doing things like self-care things are one of the things where sometimes I'm like, this isn't really necessary. I don't need this. I just need to achieve. I think learning how to take care of myself has been one of the challenges. Even for the longest time, I felt bad about just resting or just taking time off or doing things for myself. And so I'm learning that it's okay to just enjoy things and not always need to be in survival mode or like performance. And that I'm still continuously trying to unlearn, just to be like, I'm okay. I don't have to be doing something or achieving something in order to feel valuable or to feel good about myself.
Oh
So,
my goodness. So, in case you guys missed it, she's recording this from the beach
oh
because
no, I'm not at the beach.
or
I
no, you're
went
not
to
at the
the beach
beach.
yesterday.
You went to the beach yesterday. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm not at
So,
the beach.
you went to the beach, you took self-care time for
Mhm.
yourself. Guys, this version of Carolina is like night and day from when we started working together because to her point, when your imposter syndrome is governing your behaviors, everything you do is to prove your worth
Yeah.
and your value. But when you can undo that and come to a place of understanding that I have value because I exist, because I'm a
Hmm.
human being,
Yeah.
now that opens up abundance and thriving for you because you can choose to take a day and go to the beach and take your cute dog and make new friends and have connection and cultivate new connections, right? All these values that you now know are central for you, you get to create those opportunities all the time. And so I absolutely love all of that. And okay, out of curiosity, let's talk about flow state for a second.
Mhm.
So, flow state I identify as you're just completely aligned with yourself and your purpose. The easiest way to describe it is like a runner's high, right? So, for the people who've gone running and you're mile 6 or 7, and all of a sudden you're like, this is so easy, like it's effortless and it could go forever. And what is happening? Or if you lose track of time working on a puzzle or reading a
Mhm.
book or something, you feel like only 15 minutes have passed, but it's hours and hours. So those are examples of flow state. Would you mind sharing for us now, what does flow state look like for you and how do you get there?
That's a good question. I have to admit, I'm still working on understanding better how to get there, but the times that I've experienced it, obviously working at work working on something that's particularly meaningful to me, or that's really aligned with my interests and my values. I can think of working on a surgery project, academic project that was really aligned with my values. And so I was able to achieve flow state. I realized that I feel like I'm answering this question, or I'm realizing the answers to this question as I'm speaking, as I'm thinking out loud. But so it was something that was aligned with my values, something I cared about, something usually where I'm able to take the initiative and create. I really value innovation and creativity and like coming up with new ideas. So I realized that activity also involved that. Oftentimes I find myself in flow state in the operating room because I feel like I'm able to shut everything out and I'm just focused on this is a surgery I need to perform and this is important. So usually something that's important, something that's aligned with my values, something that I care deeply about, something that I feel needs to be done. So I guess those are some of the elements, just kind of thinking out loud.
Yes. So that's really powerful. They each involve being completely present and immersed in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they sound like they're aligned with your life
Mhm.
purpose in some way.
Yeah.
And I love that you also admitted that this is something I'm still working on doing, is being able to figure out how to trigger my flow
Yeah.
state. But actually, flow state, the behavior associated with it is creativity. So
Mhm.
it's funny that you already connected those dots for us, that
Yeah.
when I have the thought that I'm valuable as I am and I'm doing work that is aligned with who I'm supposed to be and my inherent values as a person, then the creativity comes alive and I'm able to start creating solutions that I know that the world needs. Oh my gosh, I could keep talking to you. I want to do a part two, but we'll talk about that later. So,
Okay.
all that to say, we have a couple of questions left. So, one of them being, if you could go back and talk to Carolina from years ago when she was struggling with her imposter syndrome and maybe you didn't even realize it, what would
Mhm.
you tell her knowing what you know now?
You talked a lot about intuition, so I would tell her to definitely trust her intuition and seek out that help a lot sooner and talk about it. I would also tell her to have learned self-compassion. As I said, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And I would tell her to be in the moment. And that's still something that I need to remind myself of because I'm a total overthinker, but at least I'm accepting that's where I am and I'm having some self-compassion for being an overthinker. And then also to know her identity and who she is as a person who is loved by God, who is a child of God. And those are still things that I tell myself because you said it took years to get there. It's not going to happen overnight, especially for some of these things that involve our childhood, that involve things in our family of origin, that involve those kinds of wounds. And so it's something that I'm continually learning to accept.
Yes. And I think one thing that you have always modeled really beautifully is honing in on that community element and
Yeah.
asking for and receiving help, which is
Mhm.
very hard to do when you're a high
Yeah.
achiever.
Yeah.
But you knew inherently, once again,
Mhm.
that those were really important for you. And we don't work super regularly together, but we do what I call strategic sessions. So every once in a while, when you
Yeah.
need a little, okay, I need to get realigned and figure out, clear the
Mhm.
cobwebs,
Yeah.
we'll do a session. And it's just been such a privilege to
Mhm.
see your growth. And also, now that you're in this season of life where you're much more accepting of yourself, you've
Mhm.
created your own identity rather than letting other people give it to you, you've done your own research and figured out
Yeah.
who you are. And now it's about sharing this beautiful message that it doesn't matter what the world tells you, what labels they put on you. What matters is what you choose to accept about yourself.
Mhm.
And as someone who was let go by her parents not that long after birth, who came to the United States as an undocumented immigrant, who acknowledges the blessings and opportunities that she's
Yeah.
had, but you also seize those opportunities and
Mhm.
you maximized all of
Yeah.
your output and what you're willing to do or and able to do with them. And it's been a real honor to walk with you and witness the amazingness that comes out of your life. And so, what is the last thing you'd like to share with the audience? Parting words that if they remember nothing else, they walk away with this.
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of things. I tend to take a lot of notes, so sometimes I need to do that to get my thoughts in order. And okay, so I wrote down nuance and balance. Nuance, sometimes our story can be complicated. I think for me, people look at me and they're like, okay, you went to all these schools, you've had this success story, but at the same time, you've also experienced these challenges. And so it could be easy for people to see one side or the other of the story and just neglect the other. And even for myself, I'm learning to embrace the two of them because sometimes people think, okay, you've been so blessed, you've had all these things, you went to Harvard, Yale, became a surgeon, what are you grieving about or what are you mourning? Or you should just be grateful and be thankful. So I oftentimes hear people say that. Sometimes even within my family, when I try to share about some of my grief when losing my grandparents, not having been raised by my parents, and also that involves other elements of grief. My siblings on my mom and my dad's side, I didn't grow up with them. So that's like another element of grief. So I think what I want to convey is you can hold both at the same time. You can hold the gratitude for the good things that have happened in your life and for the blessings that you've had. And you can also hold the grief for the losses that you've had. And it's not one or the other, because I think I could go in either extreme, be like, oh, I'm so grateful. I've had all these awesome things. The negative things, it doesn't matter. But if I do that, then I'm really living as an imposter because I'm denying a whole part of myself. But at the same time, I could also go in the opposite direction and be like, I've had all these losses. It's just too much for me, and just go to despair and just go to a dark place and just see myself succumb to being a victim. And that's not to say that there haven't been elements that have been hard, but I think that's a challenge for me, holding both of these two things in a balance and learning how to navigate these things and how to kind of rise above and live in my purpose. And I think the losses, losing my grandparents, because they were my parents, and then not having my biological parents there, and also being single can be lonely, to be honest with you. And so I've had to, and I know other people deal with those sorts of things, people who may not feel connected with their family. And that's not to say I do have a relationship with my family. It's a nuanced relationship, but I'm still close to them. But how do you navigate those things? And finding a way out of that has been a challenge for me. And I guess the way that I've been able to do it for myself is through seeking healthy support. I have a therapist. I work with you, Alani, as a life coach. I also have a church support group. And I try to seek out friendships where I can have a healthy relationship where we can share openly and vulnerably. And that's what I've been able to establish for myself as a support system. And also my faith. My faith in God, it offers me a lot of resilience and hope that I'm not here alone, that even for the things I can't control, that God is guiding my path. So I hope that offers other people at least some sort of hope or sense of there's things that we can do to try to navigate some complicated situations.
Oh man, that is so powerful. And gosh, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. You are such a bright light in and out of the medical community. And I know you personally are inspiring to me. Getting to witness your growth and your joys and your struggles has been an incredible privilege. And thank you for your trust. I think my key takeaway from today is that I'm going to oversimplify.
Mhm,
We are handed trauma, things
mhm,
happen to us, but nobody's coming to save us, and we have a responsibility to save ourselves. And
mhm.
so there's a much bigger picture in terms of it's not just what happened to me,
Yeah.
but what am I responsible to heal within myself, and how do I partner with God, however I define God, to create that healing journey? And what do I need to do to cultivate that? And that is incredibly powerful because you're able to see outside of yourself and see the much bigger picture. And as a result, you've been more comforted, less lonely as you continue this groundbreaking career. Really, you guys, we haven't even talked about any of the stuff that she's doing professionally, but she is a powerhouse. And I am so excited that we get to benefit from her incredible healing skills as a community. And if people want to find you, where can they reach you?
I guess they can reach me. I'm not super active on social media, but I guess like they can use my social media. My Instagram handle, I think, would be a good
Okay.
place.
Perfect. And we will include that in the show notes if you guys want to connect with her. And so if you are looking for more resources, check out my life purpose exercise freebie on my website, which is www.mightysparrowcoaching.com. I've included video prompts to help guide you, or you can check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power, available at all major book retailers. Until next time, humble warriors, please remember, the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your imposter syndrome to work for you. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.